Welcome back to Speducation. I am your host, Brandon Reed, and if this is your first time here, a special welcome to you. For those of you who've been coming, thank you for keeping coming back and watching the videos. And again, as always, please make sure that you're sharing this channel with others because the purpose of the channel is to help individuals that might have children with learning disabilities or help college students that are interested in special education. And there may not be a lot of resources that they can find. So if you share this with them, it'll better educate them. So please do that. Now, today we're going to be learning about a new topic. So let's dive into today's lesson. Today's lesson, acronyms in special education. Now, you're probably wondering, what is an acronym? And if you were anything like me when I was in high school and even in middle school, learning about acronyms, English language arts was not my area. So you're probably wondering, what exactly is an acronym? And if you are wondering that, that's okay, because again, you're in the same boat as me when I was in middle school and high school. So, in order to understand how acronyms relate to special education, we first have to understand what an acronym is. So, let's look at what an acronym is. Acronyms are abbreviations formed from the letters of words. These are often used as a way of saving space in documents. However, they can be confusing.
Excuse me, sir. Seeing as how the VP is such a VIP, shouldn't we keep the PC on the QT? Because if it leaks to the VC, you can end up in MIA, and then we'd all be put on KP.
Acronyms are used in a variety of settings. Just like you saw in that clip from Good Morning Vietnam, acronyms are used in the military, and that's usually to save space in documents or save time when addressing other fellow officers, because you don't want to have to say out the entire thing using an acronym. They already know what that is. It's also used in the medical field and in education, specifically special education. Even though special education uses these acronyms on a daily basis, not everyone knows what they mean, especially parents. That's why when special education teachers are writing IEPs, we make sure that it passes the stranger test. Now, you're probably wondering, well, what does that mean? What's the stranger test? Well, I'll explain it to you. The stranger test works off of the idea that anyone reading the IEP has no idea what the acronyms mean. So the special education teacher makes sure to avoid using them or explains what they mean. So, for example, whenever I do IEPs or I write IEPs and I'm typing it out, I always, if I use an acronym, I always put in parentheses what the acronym stands for. So IEP, Individualized Education Plan, or I'll explain what the acronym is to the parent. And typically, after about 3 or 4 of these meetings, the parents become pretty familiar with the acronyms. But if this is your first time or you've never really attended a meeting and you get this IEP and you're like, well, what does IEP mean? What does BIP mean? What does FBA mean? It can be a little overwhelming and confusing. So that's why we always make sure that it passes the stranger test, so that when you're reading it, you'll know exactly what it is actually saying. So what are some of the more common acronyms in special education, and what do they mean? Well, there are a lot. And today we're just going to focus on a few of them, but don't worry, we'll come back and we'll talk about some of the others in a later video. Because otherwise, if I kept talking about all of them, this video would be like 20, 30 minutes long. So today we're just going to look at a few of them. Special education acronyms. The first one is TOR. You may have heard this before. This stands for Teacher of Record. Typically, the Teacher of Record is the individual that handles all of the paperwork for your child, and they may also provide the service as well, or a combination of both. TOS. This stands for Teacher of Service. Now, you may have some special ed teachers that aren't licensed in the area or the disability that your child may have. So they can be the teacher of service and provide the service, but the licensed special ed teacher would be the teacher of record. And so typically they would handle all of the paperwork. PAR. This stands for Public Agency Representative. Whenever you're having a case conference, there always has to be a PAR representative, or a PAR present. So a public agency representative can be a counselor, it can be an administrator, it can be a dean. Typically, it's going to be an administrator, either a principal or an assistant principal or a dean of students, because they can represent the school and they will be able to answer any questions related to school policy. NCC stands for Notice of Case Conference. This is what you're provided before the actual case conference is scheduled. Well, I should say, when the case conference is scheduled, the notice of case conference is sent out to you, but it's sent out prior to the actual meeting date. SLD, you may have heard this one before. This stands for Specific Learning Disability. And this covers a wide range of areas, because if a student has a disability in language arts, it could be a number of things. They could have problem with processing. They could have a problem with decoding. They could have a problem with being able to identify details. So whenever we put down specific learning disability, we always have to put the specific learning disability that it covers. So by just saying they have a specific learning disability, that doesn't help. It has to be, well, if it's in language arts, what part of language arts is their specific learning disability in? If it's in math, what specific part of math do they have a learning disability in? Is it being able to factor numbers? Is it being able to identify equations? Is it being able to break down multiple step problems? That's what we have to be. When we're doing an IEP, we have to be specific. OHI. This stands for Other Health Impairment. This could be an individual in a wheelchair. It could be somebody that has cancer. It could be somebody that has sickle cell anemia. Any kind of health impairment that adversely affects the student's ability would be covered under OHI. Oh, and also, you could also include ADHD in this as well. If the ADHD in this student is so severe that it adversely affects the individual's ability to learn, then ADHD would be covered in this. But those are specific requirements to make sure that that actually qualifies. But this is what it would be covered under. ASD. This stands for Autism Spectrum Disorder. And autism spectrum disorder, much like specific learning disability, covers a wide range. At one time, there was a disorder called Asperger's syndrome, and it was its own disability. However, eventually it got brought into autism because it is a form of autism. So when we say autism spectrum disorder, we have to clarify what type of autism it is. Is it high functioning, low functioning? Is it Asperger's? We just have to be specific when we're addressing that. EDEH. Now, ED is emotional disability, EH is emotionally handicapped. They basically mean the same thing. Depending on the state or the region of the United States that you're in, they may use either or they may use both. But emotional disability typically refers to students that have emotional disorders such as depression, anxiety, It may be bipolar, okay, or schizophrenia. I've worked with a number of students that have ED and EH, and not all special ed teachers have license for this. So if your child has this kind of disability, they may have two special ed teachers, a teacher of record and a teacher of service. LI, language impairment. This basically deals with language barriers. SI stands for speech impediment, okay? And both of these, again, much like with ED and EH, if a special ed teacher is not licensed in those areas, then they would be teacher of service. And the special ed teacher who is licensed for language impairment and speech impediment, they would be the teacher of record. BLV, blind and low vision. Pretty self-explanatory. DHH, deaf and hard of hearing. Again, much like with blind and low vision, pretty self-explanatory. OI, orthopedic impairment. So much like with the LI and the SI, if a special ed teacher does not have a specific license for these areas, they can still provide services to your child, but they can't necessarily be the teacher of record because they don't have the license for it. So the teacher of record would handle all of the paperwork and progress monitoring for the student. The list of acronyms goes on, and those were just some of the acronyms that you might be familiar with or you might have heard in an IEP meeting before. So now that you have a better understanding of it, hopefully you don't feel as intimidated by it, and now you're more prepared when you go into those meetings. So you're probably wondering, what are we going to be learning about next week? Well, let's take a look at that. Next week, we'll talk about NCC. Here's your pop quiz for today. Do you remember what NCC stands for? If you said notice of case conference, you are correct. So we're going to talk a little bit about what the notice of case conference is, what it looks like, and then why it's important, especially in IEP meetings. And if you liked what you saw, please click the like button. And if you want updates on future videos, feel free to click the subscribe button and ring the bell for updates on future videos. And as always, if you have questions, feel free to post those in the comments. If you have questions, post those as well, because your comments and questions help guide my videos so that I know what to cover and what questions to answer. And please make sure to share this channel with others, because as I said in the beginning, the more information that a parent can get, the more prepared they are when it comes to IEP case conferences and meetings. Because I always truly do believe this, that the more informed a parent is, the more invested they'll be in their child's education. And until next time, class dismissed.